Hey guys, here we go. We're going to review 0.4, 0.5, basically the Civil War up through the start of Reconstruction here. All right, so 1849, where are we at? We're currently split between 15 slave states and 15 free states. With the Mexican-American War and all that territory we got, there's going to be some states going to come in. One of them being California, and that's going to cause some problems here. The Compromise of 1850 will solve that problem in that the anti-slavery people are going to get California as a free state, so that'll give them in, like, say, politics, voting things like Congress, a little bit of power there. On the flip side, the pro-slavery people are going to get a very strict, very powerful Fugitive Slave Act that more or less allows them to go and get anybody that they wish, whether slave or not, and bring them to the South, sell them into slavery. As you can imagine, this will upset a lot of anti-slavery people, a lot of abolitionists. So this is only going to ultimately further increase the tensions going on. Uncle Tom's Cabin is also going to further inflame the tensions going on. It's going to paint slavery in a very terrible light, which, I mean, it was. So, but it really brings it home to a lot of people. So with that in mind, there's going to be some more states that eventually want to come in, meaning in particular in 1854, Kansas and Nebraska. They're going to sit there and say, well, let's let popular sovereignty, that concept of the people deciding, that's what will decide it. Results of that is going to be an event called Bleeding Kansas that happens over the next 2 years or so. They're going to set up the Free Soilers, anti-slavery type people, and Border Ruffians, pro-slavery type people, are going to be coming into Kansas from Missouri, from Texas, Iowa, Ohio, basically all over the country, especially though those states nearby, trying to influence the elections and the voting process. Each of the pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions will set up their own government. You've got a lot of fighting, conflict, and violence here. We get our first look at John Brown, Pottawatomie Creek Massacre at this point as well. So Kansas-Nebraska Act decides whether Kansas and Nebraska will get slavery or not by popular sovereignty, which leads to Bleeding Kansas as a result. Going further on here, the Republican Party forms in 1854, so same time as the whole Kansas-Nebraska Act situation. It's kind of an anti-slavery party. Dred Scott, who you can see pictured there at the right, 1857, so just a few years before the Supreme Court, or excuse me, before the Civil War. Supreme Court is going to decide that Dred Scott, a slave who was taken by his master into a free state, Dred Scott sues and says, hey, I was taken up there. I should no longer be a slave. I'm now a free man. And the Supreme Court says, nope, psych, sorry about your luck, dude. You are not a citizen, therefore you don't have any rights, so you shouldn't really technically be able to sue. What this does is it further solidifies the idea of slaves not as people but as property and so forth, and it really just makes slavery's grip on the country a little bit stronger. Here we got Charles Sumner getting caned and beaten by Preston Brooks. Sumner is a northern, more of an abolitionist type of person who giving a speech about anti-slavery stuff, and Preston Brooks happens to beat him up for it. Kind of just suggesting that the country is devolving, where we used to be able to talk about this sensitive subject with words. Now it's devolving into violence, and it's kind of pointing us to the road to splitting. John Brown is only going to further inflame these issues. He's an abolitionist. He's involved in the Bleeding Kansas stuff. In 1859, he and his sons, they raid the arsenal, basically a weapons storehouse that the federal government owns in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. His idea is that he will confiscate all the guns, slaves will come, he'll arm the slaves, and he'll start a giant slave rebellion. No slaves actually show up. They're probably a little bit afraid. Maybe they don't know about it, etc. He ends up getting captured, hanged for treason. But what this really does is this kind of cements in the minds of Southerners that abolitionists, in particular Northerners, are crazy. They're coming after our slaves. They're trying to change our way of life. And it really just solidifies the idea that Northerners and abolitionists can't be trusted when it comes to slavery. So now you're really going to have this cemented in the minds of the Northern and Southerners. As far as whether they're pro-slavery or slavery, they're going to really solidify those ideas. Then with the election of 1860 here, looking ahead at the map here real quick, you can see that Lincoln here wins the Electoral College vote, but the Democratic Party, you see it split here with the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats. They couldn't agree on slavery. The Northern Democrats wanted popular sovereignty to determine it, even though they kind of supported slavery. And the Southern Democrats were purely slavery's got to exist everywhere, anywhere, no ifs, ands, or buts. Constitutional union there, those border states kind of trying to keep it go with the flow. Let's have the Constitution remain the guiding light. They don't really take a stance on slavery. and the northern states for the most part being anti-slave with Lincoln. With the split of the Democratic Party there over the slavery issue, Lincoln is able to get enough votes to win. The popular vote, really, they actually win if you combine the Democrats. They beat Lincoln, but because they're split, it splits the electoral college votes, et cetera, and Lincoln's able to win here. Lincoln does get a little bit of notoriety from the Lincoln-Douglas debates where his views on slavery and other things become known, trying to become a state senator for Illinois. Doesn't win, but he gets famous from it. With Lincoln getting elected, South Carolina is the first state to secede. They fully believe, even though Lincoln says, hey, I don't want to mess with slavery, it can exist where it is. They don't believe him, and they secede. And there are several others that will go ahead and secede afterwards. So they will form the Confederate States of America, and their president, Jefferson Davis, there can be seen in the bottom right-hand corner. So now here we are. We've split apart. This union has happened, and the Civil War is going to officially begin with the Battle of Fort Sumter. It's not a very large battle, but it's the first immediate fighting, and so at this point, we can't really go back. Confederates fire upon it when Lincoln decides to resupply it's a federal fort, Union fort, decides to resupply it, so they fire on it and capture it before that can happen. Boom, now we're at war. Things going on here, advantages. The North has some big ones. They've got military and manufacturing up north. They can make anything and everything that they need for the war. They've got most of the railroads for transport of troops, goods, etc. And their population is at least 3 to 1 compared to the South. So they have the troops, they have the supplies, they have the transportation. What does the South have on the flip side? Well, they have motivation, fighting for slavery, states' rights, for their homeland, etc. They do have better military officers, which helps them because their strategy is going to be a little bit better than the North. And it's a defensive war. They know the area, they know where the best places are, etc., which again motivates them a little bit more. You've got the border states there. There are states that are going to be slave states, but stay in the United States and stay in the Union. You'll note that Virginia will break off here, and West Virginia will be they'll become a free state, a Union state in 1863. 14th Amendment is eventually going to get passed here. This will deal with slaves, and this is more or less just going to talk about how if you are born in the United States or if you are naturalized, meaning you take a test to become a citizen, you get all the rights of a citizen. This is going to be the 14th Amendment. It's going to deal with the slaves post freedom after the Civil War. So things that go on during the Civil War, habeas corpus, Lincoln suspends it. It's this idea that if you get charged with a crime, you have the right to know what you're being accused of, and you have the right to a trial, basically meaning that the government can't just throw you in jail just because they want to. They have to have a reason. They have to let you know that reason, and they have to give you a trial. They can't just put you in prison for however long they want until they don't want you there anymore. Lincoln suspends this because there's concerns that, for instance, Maryland, which houses the capital of the United States, if at that point, if Maryland were to become a southern state as a border state, it would also technically take the government with the United States Union government with them, meaning Lincoln as well too, Washington, D.C. And if you were to lose the capital, that would be bad news. You'd probably either lose the war or severely set you back. So in order to combat Southern sympathizers in Maryland and other places, he suspends habeas corpus and puts people into jail an undetermined amount of time just because they're potentially causing problems for him. Seen as a little bit of a villain for this, also some see it as a necessary evil though. Also institute a draft in which they basically put your name in a hat. If they pick your name out, congratulations, you're in the military. Tends to be unpopular for the most part. Same with the Confederacy here. The difference is the Union can force you to be in there, force the states to give you these soldiers. The Confederacy can't really do that because they're a confederacy, and the states more or less tell the federal government and the Confederacy to get lost. Strategy and battles here, the Anaconda Plan. It's just the kind of idea to encircle the South, nothing in, nothing out, by sea, by land, starve them, crush them that way. Downfall, will it work? Yes, but it will take a little bit. And the Battle of Antietam is a big battle. It's a Union victory, and it's pretty important because it gives Lincoln the ability, the confidence that, hey, look, we got this big win. Now I'm going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Key things to note about it, Lincoln only frees slaves in the southern states that are rebelling against the United States. So it doesn't really actually free them in a sense because the Southerners aren't going to listen to him because they're not listening to Lincoln in the first place. It does not free slaves in the border states because if he does that, he runs the risk of them actually, jumping ship and going to the South. So he frees Southerners or Southern slaves, but it really doesn't have much effect in that context because they're not going to listen to Lincoln anyways. That's why they're rebelling. Why does Lincoln issue it, though, is because it makes the war about slavery. It keeps foreign powers who might be thinking about joining, like Britain, who might be thinking about joining the South for their cotton and stuff, keeps them out of it because Britain and other countries no longer having slaves. It would be very hypocritical of them to join in. So that's in large part why Lincoln issues it. It makes it a moral issue as well as just a let's bring the country back together issue. Key battles there. You can check those out on on the online textbook. You can do your own research. Union victories here. You got the Battle of Vicksburg. This is a big one because it gives the control of the Mississippi River to the Union. Kind of, in a sense, splits the South in relative half. Also gives the Union control over supply lines, shipping up and down the river, and that takes that away from the Southerners and the Confederacy. So that's a really big battle. In Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, you've got the Battle of Gettysburg. Turning point for the North because at this point, this is the South's last real push to take an offensive to the North. From then on, the North is going to be attacking the South and rolling them back, and the South's going to be fighting a defensive war. So that's a pretty big battle in that sense. Total warfare with General Sherman. He's got this Sherman's famous March to the Sea thing going on, and he is going through, and he's attacking military things. He's also attacking civilian targets, burning crops, animals, you name it, railroad tracks, destroying them. That way the civilians can't use them, and they can't use those things to help the military. So it's very effective, but it's also a very unpopular tactic, very harsh. And general-wise, up in the top right corner, you've got General Lee, probably the best general. General Grant, he is for the North. His idea is like, look, he's a good general in his own right, but he's like, look, we have the people, let's use them, even though it does result in more casualties probably. So ending the war here, it's been 4 years, 1861 to 1865. Early April, Confederacy surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. All told, you're probably looking at 600,000 soldiers, plus killed. Then when you add in free citizens and slaves, you're probably talking 750,000 up to 1 million, give or take a little bit. With this ending the Civil War, you've got the 13th Amendment that's going to come into play in 1865. It abolishes slavery. No more slavery. It's done. Fun fact about it of sorts, you can still technically become an indentured servant or, in a sense, be a slave if you commit a crime and you're convicted of it. You could be put to work to pay for your crimes kind of idea. With the Civil War ending, though, after these 4 long years, you've now got to rebuild the country. Thus, the next period of our discussion will be called Reconstruction. It's going to be led by radical Republicans with kind of more extreme, harsher views. They want to punish the South for what they've done. The new president, Andrew Johnson, who will take over after President Lincoln's been assassinated, he is going to be a Southern Democrat from Tennessee who is going to take a little bit more lenient view on this. So that'll be conflicting with the radical Republicans wanting to punish the South. That'll be conflicting with the president down the road, and that will cause its own issues. So there it is. If you guys have any questions, send me an email or stop by and see me.